Welcome back to Nomad Boatbuilding. I'm Mark Rudin, and we are back working on the cap rails for the Catalina Wherry. In the last episode, we laid them out, we cut them out, and we did a little bit of joinery. Today, we're going to do our final fitting of those cap rails. So let's just get right into it. Fire away. Okay. Goes about there. Nice. No steam required. That's awesome. What I might do is just shift it forward, scribe a line underneath following the shear line, clean that up, but then we'll shift it back to overcome the round over we'll put on here. And then I can use like a flush trim router bit to buzz off the inside. And that way it'll just be tight to the inwale on the inside and just proud on the outside. I kind of like that detail. I think that's kind of cool. Now that my scarves are fitted together, it's time to glue them up. I've done that directly on the boat by putting a bit of wax paper underneath the scarf area. Now I find this to be a very effective way to glue parts up, because even if the joinery isn't perfect, you can make sure the whole part is aligned to the boat properly, and the glue line will make up for any discrepancies in the joinery. Especially in the case of a hook scarf like this, one can make the argument that a heavy glue line will actually accentuate the joint. It's not my personal preference, but it's acceptable. So I came up with a plan to finish the shaping of these cap rails directly on the boat. So I've already cut them out to my original pattern that was the same width as the gunnels. Now I'm going to trim them to match the outside contour of the rub rails using a flush trim router bit. In the previous video, I discussed ideas that I had about detailing these gunnels, rounding over the corners. But then I realized that these cap rails are so integrated with the shape of the gunnels that I needed to sort those out first. So now that I have the cap rails in hand, and I kind of know where I'm going with that, I can move on to shaping the rub rails themselves. So I'm going to start by giving them a generous 1/2 inch round over on the outside top edge. We'll deal with the inside corner in a bit. that round over done, I'm going to establish a distance that I want to offset my cap rails from that rounded edge. Then I can set my cap rail back in place, and we'll mark it and then trim them down to size on the bandsaw. We're just going to trim it a little outside of our pencil lines, because after that we're going to go right back onto the boat and get our flush trim router out again. Now with the cap rails flush trimmed to the inside face of the inwales, we can move on to the last little bit, which is detailing the top inside corner. So I'm going to start by putting a small round over on the cap rail itself, and then we'll move on to the rest of the shear line. Now I've left the cap rails in place for this operation because I want to stop this little round over just short of those cap rails. I want that round over to basically kind of fade out. Then the cap rails are going to be flush with the inside of the inwales. Okay, I'm going to make some oarlock pads for the boat. I'm not going to do the whole process, but we'll look at some of the details here. So I've started out by drawing myself out a full-scale drawing of my in-wale and out-wale construction, and my rail caps are indicated on there. And I've used the actual oarlock here to try and find how I want this to sit in here. So of course this is showing it on end, so your hardware will be turned on end, but I'll just lay it sideways here for the moment. And Joe wants me to sort of try and angle these towards level as much as possible, which is pretty good. I don't have a lot of wiggle room. I've only got 3/4 of an inch here and an half inch thick oarlock, so I can only get a couple of degrees, 2-3 degrees maybe, of angle in there. So I got to be careful that I'm not, this isn't hitting the planking is what it boils down to. So I've worked out a basic design for what I want that oarlock pad to be. I've got my stock here. It's a little over thickness right now, and it's a little over width. And I'm just going to start by making my mortise for my oarlock itself. So I start out by doing some test holes, first taking the diameter of this socket here and matching that diameter. What I get is it's a nice fit, but it's too tight. It's like you're never going to get this thing sitting down properly like that. So I've had to step it up to the next size up, which makes it a little bit on the loose side, but I could always do an epoxy fill to bring it up to 100%. It's not touching the bottom of the hole, but notice how it's rocking around. And that's because this little radius here in the flange. To fix that, in order to fit these, we need to just do a little bit of a chamfer. Just do a small chamfer. It's getting closer. Just a little bit more. And now, so it doesn't really rock around quite so much. And I want to just chamfer it out just enough so it doesn't rock, but not so much that the edges of this hole show past the side of this piece of hardware. Anyhow, that's what I've done down here. And so now I want to mark these out in order to do the mortising. And we do want to mortise this down into the oarlock. Some people will just mount them flush on top. And yes, you can do that. The only thing holding it there then are just the screws. I like to set it down into the oarlock pad so that the whole flange here is locked in, and that's holding it in place. And that means the hardware, the screws that are holding this in, are doing very, very little. So here's a little trick I came up with. First of all, we're just going to make sure we mark each of these guys for the part that it's going to be fitted to, because they are never exactly the same. So this one goes with that one. And I'm just going to indicate, I've got some markings on here telling me which side is which. Okay. And so I'm going to use this carriage bolt in order to just lock this on here. I've done this many times, just holding it in place, or I've tried clamping it in place, which is also a bit of a pain because the clamp is always in your way. I've also just tried pre-drilling for the screws and screwing it down. That works okay too. But this is something I just came up with today, and it works great. So just tighten that up a little bit. That carriage bolt holds it on just perfectly firm enough. I'm just going to use a square here just to make sure that we are square from side to side. There are some people that will mount these at an angle so that the screws are not falling into the same grain path as each other. I don't really like the looks of that, and I don't really think it does a heck of a lot for you. Take a nice sharp knife now, and we carefully incise around this. So I'll start at a corner and work my way back, not going all the way to the end because you'll always overshoot a little bit. Like so. Flip that over. And then I'll do the same thing the long ways. And you got to use a light touch when you're doing this along the grain, because the grain will pull your knife off its target if you don't use very light strokes to get it started. We don't have to go crazy deep. You know, if I get down a 1/16 or something, that's plenty. I don't really need to go that far. And you can't trust these castings to be consistent. They're going to be out of whack because of the finishing process. So you have to make these individual. You could make a universal jig, I suppose. But anyhow, there we go. So now what I like to do is just do a little bit of incising with a chisel. So I'm just going to take out the tiny bit here like this. Just chipping out a hair. I'll do it both sides. And I want to make sure if I incise this way that I don't overshoot my knife line. So I've got to follow the knife line. And I may just deepen that a little bit in both directions. And of course, then we also want to do it this way too. And the reason for doing this is this just makes it so much easier to see what you're doing. I'm going to use a router to excavate this little mortise. And if you protect your edges by just breaking a little chip away like this, and when you're using the router, you can just hold back from that edge by just a tiny little bit. And then it's easy to clean it up to that line by hand afterwards. Just like that. So note how I've left all these oarlocks attached to the same stick. I haven't cut them into smaller pieces. It's just way easier to hang on to the work while it's long like this, and it gives me the opportunity to change the length a little bit if I've decided it doesn't look quite right. I generally like to sneak up on the line, working my way around in little circles like this. I don't know, at least for me this is the way to do it that feels safe. Of course, you always got to be worried about the router climbing in the wrong direction on you. So, I take it slow and easy. I always hang back from the line too. That's why I do this incising with the chisel all the way around, because it makes it very easy to see where that line is. The pencil line will just disappear, but that chisel line is very obvious. And now with just a little bit left behind, maybe not even a 1/16, it's really easy to clean it up to the line. We've got our blocks roughed out, finished the mortise, marked all our directions so that we get it all fitting together the same way each time. So there's a reasonable fit. There's just a, there's a whisker of space showing around that. It's almost impossible to avoid. If you make it too tight, you can't even get this thing in and out. So that's done. Now we just need to come up with our final shape. So I've started by just blocking this out as per my drawing, reducing the top down to the narrowest possible width just to reduce weight visually. There's plenty of strength here. I've got some funny angles on this particular oarlock pad just because we're trying to pinch exactly where that hole lands, and there's only so much room on that the gunnel cap, so it's coming out this shape. But anyway, we need to reduce this down to something that looks attractive. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to just give myself a healthy, about a 5/16 lip on the ends. And let's see what we'll do. We'll give ourselves, say, 3/4 of an inch on the top there. That'll be just flats that remain. And I'll just use one of my sweeps here to connect the dots. We want just a little bit of a concave to it. Doesn't need to be a lot, but a little bit makes it look so much more elegant. So just draw that on there, and I'll repeat it on the other side. Okay, so we're going to cut this so it's square to the bottom. And right now I've got this angle square, but this one has this angle drops off on the back side. So the result, if we look at one that's already cut here, is when we run it through the bandsaw like so with a plumb cut, this comes away and our shoulder here sweeps out as a result of the oddball angles. I'm going to leave that alone because I think that actually looks kind of attractive, having this non-rectangular shape up here. But in general, we would usually just have that being sort of a square cut. You'd soften all this up a little bit, leaving a bit of a haunch here. And sometimes if I were going to glue this down, I would probably just have these taper out to nothing rather than right out. But these are going to get screwed down, so we need some meat. And I'll probably add a little chamfer onto these edges as well, just to soften those up, but we'll do that by hand. There's one last thing we need to do, and that is add the shape to the inside and outside. So I wanted to reduce as much material as possible for that. Now I did one thing that I screwed up, and when I truncated this whole shape, I forgot to leave an allowance for the concavity on the backside here. So I'm stuck with this width at the top. But what I might do is I might just take it to the sander and just whittle away the back edge here, leaving it square up here, and just taking away all the material down lower to give that concavity. It'll trick the eye into thinking it's there, and up here at the top we won't really notice it so much. And of course on the outside it's got a convex shape, so that's easy to do. We've got plenty of material to work with for that. Once we get it all roughed out, then it's just a question of sort of tweaking it by eye until it looks nice. oarlock pads are done. I think they look pretty good. Got a couple degrees of slant to the inboard side, which is what we wanted. My oarlock pads are done. I've fit them in place. I've bored the holes through for the oarlocks to pass all the way through the gunnel structure. I wish I'd sort of planned ahead a little bit better here. It's standard practice to put solid blocking anywhere your oarlocks are going to go. I didn't do that. I don't know why. I really don't know why. But I wish I had. This worked out fine in that my oarlock is going to pass all the way through. It's going to pass all the way through here. And it's solid all the way through, so there's a ton of support for the oarlock here to bear against. Up forward, it hits one of the voids, which is not the end of the world because I think the oarlock itself is big enough. It's got the cap rail underneath it that it's connected to, so there's like an inch, a good solid inch of oak below the oarlock itself to help support it, so I'm not worried about that. But up here, where my screws pass through, on the outside ones at the very least, I've hit a void. You can see right here my screw hole just clipped the planking a little bit. I was going to make these shorter screws, so it's not the end of the world, but still, there's no holding there. Same thing over here, just skimmed through it, so I need to put in some blocking at least halfway through that hole right there. Same thing over here. I might just try and block in the whole thing actually. This hole's going right through this blocking that's already in place, so that's great. That's super solid. And there's plenty of holding where these other screws go through the inwale. Okay, so I'm going to have to pull this cap rail off and put some more blocking in here, and before we're done we'll have to re-drill a couple of holes to make that all fit together. I really should have just put a little bit more effort into thinking about where this stuff was going, but I didn't really do that, which is a mistake. So I'm going to be paying for that in the fact that I can't really move ahead with my finishing operation, which is one thing I was kind of hoping I would get onto today. But nonetheless, I mean, that's just the way it goes sometimes. You can't think of everything ahead of time. So we'll just pull off the cap rails, we'll add a little bit of material, and we'll be back on track tomorrow. Okay, well there we go. Our cap rails are done. I hope you'll join me again next time on Building Catalina Wherry. Catch you later, folks.